Alright everyone, so we are either at the final battle of Elbaf, or we are at a devastating midpoint for Elbaf, and that's very exciting because we have genuinely no idea which direction this arc is about to go, how long it's going to be, if we're set to get final matchups or something here or not, if the whole conflict's going to be resolved, if everything's going to go downhill for the Straw Hats. Did Oda first want to do this in sort of two waves, where he had the mid and lower level Straw Hats defeated first, or are the Monster Tree and Loki being sent up as basically this Avengers squad to come in and save the day and rescue everybody? We don't know. At the end of the day, I still believe that Elbaf is set to be a slightly longer arc, going all the way to chapter 1200. However, it is entirely possible that we are at the grand finale already, and that means that a lot of things that need to be resolved, such as what's the deal with Loki and Harold, what's that whole backstory, we're going to find out about that right now. Whatever big scene is in store for Usopp, we're going to get that right now. For whatever reason, Shanks has been talked about a lot throughout this arc, like almost every other chapter, so if Shanks has any relevance to this arc, that's going to come into play right now. And we might be set to get some significant final battle matchups here. So we could be looking at Luffy and Loki potentially versus Gunko, Imu, Avatar. We could be looking at Zoro and Sanji versus Dory and Brogy. There's a ton of potential right here. And then of course we've still got the two Gods Knights running around, Killingham and Sommers. So let's start from the top real quick. Smallest to biggest.
But first, do you love One Piece's villains? Well then you're gonna love our new line of artwork, the Ultimate One Piece Villain Poster Collection. Starting with Lucci, Crocodile, and Doflamingo, we are going through the entire story of One Piece to showcase every major arc's iconic villain, all drawn in minimalist art style, with hidden layers of imagery in each work, showcasing the most powerful moment from each of these classic villain storylines. And the best part is that you can buy 2 villain posters and get a third one free. So if you want to get Lucci from Enies Lobby, Crocodile from Alabasta, Doflamingo from Dressrosa, or all 3, then hit the link below and pick them up for your walls. Each month we'll be bringing the entire story of One Piece to life, arc by arc, villain by villain. So start your collection here. And if you've completed the full collection of the world of One Piece, if you have a poster of every island, then we will send you the final unlockable exclusive poster for free. One Piece's dream destination, the moon. Just tag me at Mr. Morgeman on Twitter with a photo of your full collection and we will send you the moon for free.
So, the Giants in general turning one by one. I'm glad that Oda is elaborating on this scene a little bit, even if it did take a good chunk of this chapter. So we're seeing, in general, the Giant Warrior Pirates turn into the demon version of the Giant Warrior Pirates. And just the scale that everything is progressing up is kind of crazy to see, because obviously we've got humans who are so minuscule compared to giants, but now we've got giants faced with gigantic versions of giants, and then behind them are these gigantic nightmare creatures. So just the continuing scale, like I wonder what a Tontada would think if they were just dropped into this whole situation. It feels like we're at a point where like Luffy, Zoro, Sanji trying to fight any of these monster nightmare type creatures that Killingham created, it's basically like an ant fighting an elephant. And it's kind of cool that we've gotten to a point in One Piece where size really doesn't matter anymore. I remember pre-time skip, that was such a thing. Like when the Straw Hats ran into Dory and Brogy in the first place, the thing that stood out was just, oh my god, these guys are so huge. They're just so out of our league, because how are we supposed to compete with characters like this? I remember when we reached Jaya and we saw those giant shadows in the distance that were actually being cast from the people in Skypiea, and we thought, oh my god, those type of characters are gods. Like, how could the Straw Hats ever defeat anything of that size? We learned that they weren't actually threats, they were just shadows, but at this point in the story, if the Straw Hats ran into characters of that size, it would still be a fair fight, because at this point in time, it just doesn't seem to matter anymore. Like, Luffy, for all of post-time skip, he's been pitted against gigantic creatures, the Kraken, numbers, things like that, and they're basically all fodder to him. Zoro cut up Pika like it was nothing, Kobe beat up Evolo Pizarro like it was nothing. I think it's very fitting that the point in the story where we reach Elbaf is also the point where, for the Straw Hats, the thing that was so impressive and fantastical and fearsome about the Giants in the first place when they first entered the Grand Line was that these beings are so big. That was the first island that hammered into us that, okay, this is what the Grand Line is going to be like. It's a sort of world beyond our imaginations. The scale of the threats out there are just huge. And it's so perfect that now that the Straw Hats are a Yonko crew and they've kind of reached the peak of what you can be in the Grand Line, now they're getting to Elbaf, and that very same thing that was so impressive and scary to them at first, it's meaningless. In fact, the Giants are now getting a taste of what it's like to be the tiny little underdogs in the face of overwhelming monstrous beings. Whereas for the Straw Hats, this is just another Tuesday. So I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate that first. Now let's talk real quick about Killingham. So the way the Gods Knights were first introduced, aside from Shamrock, who was obviously the big boss, it felt to me like Sommers seemed like the most impressive of the trio between Sommers, Gunko, and Killingham, because just from their initial designs and appearances, Killingham seemed kind of goofy looking, and Sommers, he has all these medals, he's the oldest one in the group. It felt to me like, okay, maybe Sommers commands the most authority, and I think people are most excited to see what is Sommers' future matchup going to be like. Then we got to see Gunko in action, and it was like, holy shit, Gunko is actually at least like a first mate level character, because she just soloed pretty much all of the mid and lower level Straw Hats effortlessly. Sommers obviously proved to be able to handle Robin and Saul just as easily, so it's not much to say between them. But then Killingham, I think I was kind of taking him for granted so far just because of the design. It's amazing what wonders a design can do in terms of how you view a certain character, because Killingham up till now, I've talked about this in past chapter reviews, but I think it can't be overstated enough just how insane what he's been doing is, because Gunko and Sommers are essentially irrelevant to the conquest of Elbaf. Killingham's ability alone is more powerful than the entirety of Kaido's Gifter army that he spent years assembling with him, Doflamingo, and Caesar. Sommers can whip up an army that is stronger than the entire nation of Elbaf. He has what is, at least on a large scale, in terms of like a general distance-based battle, Killingham genuinely has one of the most powerful Devil Fruits we've ever seen. It is definitely the strongest Devil Fruit in One Piece history when it comes to just taking on large forces all at once. And I think one of the reasons that I and many others didn't really give Killingham that much props is because we maybe all kind of underestimated him in a sense, because I think many of us may have subconsciously assumed that this guy's so broken in terms of his general abilities, he's probably not that strong 1v1, at least relative to the other Gods Knights, because, you know, while we saw Gunko taking on all these Straw Hats, and we saw Sommers taking on Saul and Robin and Chopper, and both these Gods Knights taking care of their matchups effortlessly, Killingham was still impressive, but he pretty much just suplexed this Walrus Teacher guy that we have no real anything to scale off of. So we got the sense that he's probably strong, but his real strength must be in all of these nightmare creatures that he's able to create. Now with the design, I think it's entirely possible that Killingham is just supposed to be the strongest of this group. And it might be silly to scale off of design, but there is something to design in general storytelling, at least in anime manga, because authors have their favorites, and when an author wants to have a certain character create a sense of impact, the author is likely going to spend more time thinking up of an interesting design for that character, because the author is more excited about the effect that that character is going to have on the reader. It's the same reason that Kaido has such a cool design. It's the same reason that Loki has such a cool design. Authors are just naturally subconsciously going to put more time into designing the characters that are meant to be the most exciting, because that is what is exciting for the author. So with Killingham's overall design, I'm now leaning towards, okay, maybe he is just meant to be the strongest of this trio of Gods Knights. And I mean, if you just look at the effect that has taken place over the island of Elbaf, 90% of this is Killingham's work. Because let's be honest, I know Imu had to come in, but they low-key were just doing fine before Imu even showed up. They'd just disposed of Scopragaban by themselves, they'd taken out all of the Straw, they pretty much crushed the entire forces of Elbaf, and it was really just that final group of Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and then Loki at the bottom that still needed to potentially be taken care of down the line, that obviously these three Gods Knights could not do on their own. Now that being said, this is where we get to the interesting part of the chapter. Oda smartly cut away from this group of characters once the Gods Knights assault really got rolling, but now we're cutting back to Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Loki. The reason I say that Oda smartly cut away from these characters is because the tone was just too different from what's going on upstairs. This is something that I generally disliked in many of the recent arcs in One Piece, where Oda can set up a really powerful, dramatic, heavy scene where it feels like there's a lot of tension, but then in that same chapter, he'll just be cutting away to lots of other random stuff that kind of undercuts that tension, because those other scenes that Oda's cutting to feature characters who are having the time of their lives and have no tension or any sort of drama or pressure or stress going on. Oda kept us away from all that to build up the effect of the Gods Knights crushing the Straw Hats, crushing the Giants of Elbaf, and then the impact, of course, of Imu arriving. If we're continuously cutting back and forth to Luffy and Loki joking around eating food, it's not going to have that same sort of effect on us, the reader. And it would also be a sort of continuous reminder that, yeah, the stuff that's going on upstairs is really bad, but the big guns for the good guys are downstairs, so they'll come in to save the day. It's good to stay away from showcasing us that and reminding us of that so that we can stay fixated on the problems that the other characters upstairs are suffering from. At the same time, I'm glad that Oda is now cutting back to this group because this is the time to involve them. Oda's already established that nobody upstairs can handle what's going on up there. So at this point, we need to answer the question of, okay, what happens if the actual fighters show up? What happens if Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Loki all go back up there? Potentially Gaban, depending on what can be done to heal him, we don't know. Because that is where real threat comes from. It's not just taking out the mid-tier Straw Hats or the Giants of Elbaf, it's what happens when the Monster Trio and Elbaf's strongest fighter get involved. How will Imu and the Gods Knights do at that point in time? Oda has a prime opportunity to really hammer in the endgame threat of these villains. At the same time, I have no real expectations in terms of whether or not this should be a defeat or a victory for the good guys. I'm excited to see where Oda goes here. At the very least, I want to feel like Imu is a fitting threat as the final villain of the story. That's all I care about. Whether or not Luffy and them win in some sort of climactic cool fashion, that's perfectly fine as long as it feels like a fitting challenge. Because at the end of the day, we know that this isn't the true Imu, and this isn't the full force of the Gods Knights, right? Now, in terms of the interactions going on downstairs, the first thing that stood out is Luffy's observation haki. He said that he was able to tell that it was Chopper, but apparently he would not normally be able to tell that it was specifically Chopper. Oda still hasn't given us a ton of details necessarily about what can and can't be sensed exactly with observation haki. We did get the idea that it's hard to tell who exactly you might be sensing with observation haki. Like Enel in Skypiea was able to sense a certain number of voices, but I don't think he could pinpoint exactly which voice was going out at which time. So the fact that Luffy is able to sense that it is Chopper specifically suggests that Luffy does have the voice of all things here. We also got the sense that Loki has comparably significant observation haki to Luffy, and I have a whole video coming out about Loki after this chapter on a very interesting topic this Tuesday, so watch out for that. But my favorite thing definitely was just seeing Loki establishing that he is going to get in on the action here. I'm hoping that Chopper does have some of that emergency drug that was used to heal up Zoro back in Wano to give to Loki here, because that would be the perfect way to get Loki out of, his injured state and finally get to see what he can do in battle. Because at this point in time, he's just too weak to technically be able to do anything. Also, big shoutouts to Chopper. I think Oda's been really showing a lot of love to the side Straw Hats so far this arc, between Robin, Brook, a bit of Frankie, and now even Chopper. We got some of Nami earlier in the arc, and we know Usopp's around the corner, so Oda's been doing a phenomenal job with all the Straw Hats. Chopper coming in clutch here, saving Gaban, and then coming in clutch, potentially providing a quick heal for Loki, and maybe even Gaban. That would be huge. So I think just in general, great treatment by Oda for all of his characters so far, and we've got this sort of cool Avengers sort of setup of the big, bad, strongest fighters of the good guys heading upstairs to the Sun Realm to really take on the final villain of the story for the first time. This is one of the most exciting setups in One Piece that we've ever had. This is really the first bout of the heroes against God, so it's a preview for what's going to happen at the end of the story. I think this lineup versus the lineup upstairs is just going to make for some absolute fireworks. Whether it's the end of the arc or supposed to be the midpoint of the arc, we don't know, and that's what makes this matchup so exciting. And finally, we have the message from the voice of the people, my top tier of patrons. Big Al said, "We're getting more crumbs about King Harold having a relationship to the Gods Knights and Imu. When Luffy and his group went for Loki's key, they noticed all the giants with horns in the castle. If that was the result of being turned by Imu, what stopped Loki and Jarl from being turned? I think this is going to point to why Jarl has said that the sword in his head is the only thing that saved him." That is a phenomenal point. And what if Loki was the one that put the sword through Jarl's head because for whatever reason that helped stop Jarl from turning? It's possible the characters that are strong enough or have strong enough wills might be able to prevent themselves from being turned by Imu, because that could be a reason as to why Loki was not turned. Or maybe Harold and all of his subordinates were turned, and then Loki got to the scene late, and at that point Imu had stopped doing his shenanigans, and so then Loki fought them all. I do have a pretty strong theory as to what actually happened between Loki and Harold that I think just finally came into place with the specific comments by Imu from this chapter, so watch out for that in a future theory. Not this next Tuesday's video, although that is a very interesting topic as well, but the Loki Harold video is coming in the near future, so watch out for that. And with that, I will talk to you all later.